Liam had always been a person who enjoyed life on his own terms. He wasn't the quiet, keep-to-yourself type of neighbor that some might prefer in the suburbs. No, Liam was a social guy, known for throwing weekend barbecues, hosting gatherings for friends, and making the most of the spacious backyard that came with his home. His house, a sleek, modern build with large windows and a wooden deck, stood out from the more traditional homes around it. While many neighbors admired the stylish design and lively energy he brought to the area, not everyone was a fan. One of those who found Liam's presence disruptive was Karen, the self-appointed leader of the local neighborhood improvement group. She was a middle-aged woman with a reputation for being overly controlling and relentless when it came to enforcing her vision of what the neighborhood should be. From the moment Liam moved in a couple of years ago, Karen made her feelings about him clear. At first, it was small things, polite but pointed comments about noise levels or how some people didn't seem to respect the quiet nature of the community. Liam mostly brushed it off. After all, he wasn't breaking any rules, and his gatherings always wrapped up at a reasonable hour. But as time went on, Karen's passive-aggressive remarks turned into outright hostility. She began sending formal complaints about violations that didn't exist, such as improperly maintained landscaping or unauthorized exterior lighting. Every time Liam ignored her petty grievances, it only seemed to fuel her frustration. For Karen, Liam was more than just an annoyance, he was a threat to her control. Over the years, she had carefully cultivated an image of herself as the gatekeeper of neighborhood standards. She believed that without her constant oversight, the area would lose its charm, property values would plummet, and everything she had worked for would go to waste. Liam, with his carefree attitude and refusal to conform, represented everything she despised. He was popular, independent, and most importantly, he didn't take her seriously. To Karen, that was unforgivable. Things escalated when Karen began spreading rumors about Liam among the neighbors. She told anyone who would listen that his gatherings were attracting the wrong kind of people to the area and that his house, with its bright outdoor lights and frequent visitors, was disrupting the peace. Some neighbors, either intimidated by Karen's domineering presence or genuinely annoyed by the activity around Liam's house, began to distance themselves from him. Others, however, saw through Karen's tactics and continued to support Liam, appreciating his friendly demeanor and willingness to help out when needed. Despite the mounting tension, Liam tried not to let Karen's antics bother him. He loved his home and enjoyed his life there. He wasn't going to let one bitter neighbor ruin that for him. Still, there were moments when a relentless campaign against him got under his skin. One day, after receiving yet another baseless complaint letter from Karen about his supposedly unsightly lawn furniture, Liam jokingly told a friend, "If she keeps this up, I might have to start charging her rent for how much space I'm taking up in her head." They both laughed, but deep down, Liam knew the situation wasn't something to take lightly. Karen had a way of turning small disputes into big problems, and he suspected she wasn't done causing trouble. Sure enough, Karen didn't stop. At a neighborhood meeting a few weeks later, she made a public statement that clearly targeted Liam without mentioning his name directly. She talked about how the neighborhood was losing its quiet charm because of certain people who didn't respect community values. She called for stricter enforcement of rules and encouraged residents to report any activity they deemed inappropriate. It was clear that Karen wanted to create an environment where she could pressure Liam into either conforming to her standards or leaving altogether. But Liam wasn't one to back down easily. He knew he wasn't doing anything wrong, and he wasn't going to let Karen intimidate him into changing his lifestyle. What he didn't realize, however, was just how far Karen was willing to go to get her way. This wasn't just about noise complaints or lawn furniture anymore. Karen saw Liam as a personal enemy, and for someone like her, that meant the situation was about to take a much darker turn. One evening, after returning home from a casual dinner with friends, Liam noticed something strange. As he pulled into his driveway, he saw Karen standing across the street, watching his house. There was something unsettling about the way she stood there, arms crossed, staring silently. Liam thought about confronting her but decided against it. Instead, he went inside, locked the door, and tried to shake off the uneasy feeling. He told himself that Karen was just being her usual nosy self and that there was no real danger. Unfortunately, Liam's instincts were right, something bad was coming. He just didn't know it yet. It was late one night when Liam's life took a sudden and unexpected turn. The evening had been calm, peaceful even. He had spent most of it working on some restaurant paperwork in his living room with the soft hum of music playing in the background. Everything seemed normal until a faint but unmistakable smell of burning reached his nose. At first, Liam thought it might have been coming from outside, maybe someone was using a fire pit or grilling late. But the smell grew stronger, sharper, and more alarming by the second. He got up, walked over to the back door, and immediately froze. Through the glass door leading to his backyard, he could see flickers of orange and yellow reflecting off the windows of his house. His outdoor kitchen, built just last summer, was engulfed in flames. Panic shot through him, but years of experience running high-stress restaurant operations kicked in, keeping him focused. He grabbed his phone and quickly called 911, reporting the fire as he sprinted out the front door toward the side gate that led to the backyard. By the time he reached the scene, the flames were roaring, climbing up the wooden beams of the pergola that shaded the outdoor seating area. The heat was intense, radiating outward in waves that made it hard to get too close. Without thinking twice, Liam grabbed the garden hose and began spraying water at the edges of the fire, trying to prevent it from spreading to the house itself. He knew he wasn't going to be able to put it out on his own, but he was determined to do whatever he could until the fire department arrived. Within minutes, he heard the sound of sirens in the distance, growing louder as they approached. Relief washed over him, though the tension in his body didn't ease. He kept spraying water until he saw the flashing red and blue lights reflecting off the trees and the firefighters rushing toward the flames with their equipment. Stepping back, he let the professionals take over, his chest rising and falling rapidly as adrenaline coursed through his veins. The fire was extinguished faster than he expected, but the damage was already done. His once beautiful outdoor kitchen was a charred ruin, the wood blackened and smoking, the stainless steel appliances warped from the heat. Liam stood there in silence, taking in the destruction as the firefighters worked to ensure that no embers remained to reignite the flames. "Looks like a controlled burn gone wrong," one of the firefighters said, approaching Liam. "Did you have anything burning back here earlier tonight?" "No," Liam replied firmly, shaking his head. "I haven't used the grill or the fire pit in days." The firefighter frowned, glancing back at the burned remains. "Well, we'll take a closer look, but this doesn't seem like an accident. See those scorch patterns?" He pointed toward the base of what was left of the pergola. "That's consistent with a fire that was started deliberately. Could be someone poured an accelerant and lit it up." The words hit Liam like a punch to the gut. An intentional fire? Someone had set fire to his property on purpose? He opened his mouth to respond, but before he could say anything, a familiar voice cut through the night air, sharp and grating. "Well, isn't this just typical?" Karen said, standing at the edge of his driveway with her arms crossed. She wasn't alone. Several other neighbors had gathered nearby, drawn by the flashing lights and commotion. "You know, some of us were trying to sleep, but I guess that doesn't matter to certain people." Liam's jaw clenched as he turned to face her. "Karen, my outdoor kitchen was just set on fire. I don't think now is the time to complain about your beauty sleep." Karen ignored his comment, her eyes narrowing as she scanned the scene. "Maybe if you didn't have such an unsightly setup back here, things like this wouldn't happen. It's practically inviting trouble." Liam couldn't believe what he was hearing. His outdoor kitchen had been a highlight of the neighborhood when he first built it, admired by many of the same people who were now standing silently behind Karen, too afraid to speak up. But tonight, with the smell of smoke still lingering in the air and the remnants of the fire still smoldering, Karen had managed to twist the situation into another excuse to criticize him. Before Liam could respond, one of the firefighters approached the group. "We're wrapping up here, but I'd recommend getting in touch with the police. If this was arson, they'll want to investigate." "Arson?" Karen repeated, feigning shock. "Oh, how terrible. I hope you're not suggesting someone in the neighborhood would do such a thing." The firefighter didn't respond, simply giving Liam a nod before heading back toward the truck. Liam watched them go, his mind racing. Arson. Someone had come onto his property, poured some kind of accelerant on his outdoor kitchen, and set it ablaze. And now Karen was standing here, acting as though she had nothing to do with it, while subtly suggesting that it was somehow his fault. But the worst was yet to come. As the fire truck pulled out of the driveway, a second set of flashing lights appeared down the street. An ambulance, called in case of smoke inhalation or injury, was trying to make its way through. Liam hadn't even realized they'd been called, but he was grateful nonetheless. However, Karen clearly didn't share that sentiment. "You've got to be kidding me," she muttered, marching toward the street where the ambulance had stopped. "I need to get to work in the morning, and now my driveway's blocked because of this nonsense." The paramedics, busy unloading equipment, barely paid her any attention. Frustrated, Karen stormed back to her car, pulled open the driver's side door, and revved the engine. Liam watched in disbelief as she edged the car forward, clearly intending to squeeze past the ambulance despite the limited space. The right side of her car scraped against the edge of the ambulance, producing a loud screeching noise that made everyone wince. "Are you insane?" Liam shouted, running toward her. "You just damaged an ambulance." Karen stepped out of her car, examining the long scratch on the side. Well, if they hadn't been blocking the road, this wouldn't have happened. By now, one of the paramedics had approached, his expression a mix of confusion and irritation. "Ma'am, you need to move your car and wait. We're here on an emergency call." Karen rolled her eyes. "Emergency? The fire's already out. You're just standing around doing nothing. Why don't you pack it up and go?" Liam could barely contain his anger. "Someone just tried to burn my house down, Karen. This isn't about your damn driveway." Karen gave him a cold look, her lips curling into a smug smile. "Maybe if you didn't attract so much attention to yourself, things like this wouldn't happen. Just something to think about." With that, she got back into her car, reversed sharply, and sped off down the street. Liam stood there, heart pounding in his chest, the weight of what had just happened settling heavily on his shoulders. Someone had tried to destroy his property, and Karen had not only shown zero empathy but had escalated the situation by damaging an emergency vehicle. This was no longer just a neighborhood dispute. This was war. The morning after the fire, Liam woke up feeling drained, both physically and mentally. He hadn't slept much, his mind replaying the events of the night before in an endless loop. The sight of flames consuming his outdoor kitchen, the accusatory remarks from Karen, and her reckless act of damaging the ambulance had all left him seething with frustration and uncertainty. Someone had clearly targeted him, and while he couldn't prove that Karen was behind the fire, her behavior throughout the night had only fueled his suspicions. Determined not to let this incident go unanswered, Liam started the day by calling his lawyer Nick. Nick had helped him with a few legal matters in the past, and though none of them had been as serious as this, Liam trusted his sharp instincts and pragmatic approach. After listening carefully to Liam's account of what had happened, Nick agreed that they needed to act quickly. The first step was filing a police report about the suspected arson and the damage caused by Karen to the ambulance. Though the firefighters had already mentioned arson as a possibility, officially reporting it would put pressure on the authorities to investigate. "Keep everything documented," Nick advised. "Take photos of the damage, any suspicious activity you notice, and make sure to save those complaint letters Karen has been sending you. If this escalates further, and I have a feeling we're going to need a solid case to protect you." Liam spent the next hour photographing the burned remains of his outdoor kitchen, capturing every angle in detail. The charred beams, the melted appliances, the scorched stone counters. It was a stark reminder of how quickly things could go wrong. He also took photos of his front driveway, where Karen's car had scraped against the ambulance, leaving behind a long streak of red paint and a dent in the vehicle's side. He didn't expect the paramedics to press charges, but it was another piece of evidence showing how irrational Karen had become. By mid-morning, Liam had done everything he could for the time being, but the unease lingering in his chest refused to go away. He decided to take a break and clear his head with a walk around the neighborhood. As he strolled down the quiet streets, he noticed that many of the neighbors were avoiding eye contact or quickly retreating indoors when they saw him. The night's events had clearly made an impression, but not in the way he had hoped. Instead of showing support, it seemed like most of the residents wanted to stay out of the conflict altogether, likely afraid of getting on Karen's bad side. Only one neighbor, an elderly woman named Mrs. Whitaker, offered him a sympathetic smile and a brief word of encouragement as he passed by. "Don't let her push you around, Liam. Some of us can see what's really going on." Her words gave him a small boost of morale, but they also highlighted how isolated he had become. Karen had spent years building her influence in the neighborhood, cultivating fear and obedience among the residents. Standing up to her wasn't just about defending his own property anymore. It was about breaking the stranglehold she had on the entire community. That afternoon, Liam received a knock on his door. He opened it to find two men in uniform standing on his front porch. For a brief, hopeful moment, he thought they might be detectives following up on the arson report. Instead, they introduced themselves as inspectors from the city's code enforcement department. One of them, a tall man with a clipboard, explained that they were there to investigate a complaint about unauthorized construction on Liam's property. "Unauthorized construction," Liam repeated, confused. "You mean my outdoor kitchen? That was built over a year ago, and I have all the necessary permits." "We'll need to see those permits," the inspector said flatly. "Until we can verify that everything was done according to code, your property will be under review." Liam's hands clenched into fists at his sides as he tried to keep his temper in check. It was obvious who had filed the complaint. Karen wasn't wasting any time finding new ways to make his life difficult. Still, he knew that losing his cool wouldn't help the situation. Instead, he nodded curtly and invited the inspectors inside to wait while he retrieved the documents from his office. As he handed over the permits, he couldn't help but notice the way the inspectors exchanged glances, as if they were expecting something to be out of order. When they finished reviewing the paperwork, they looked almost disappointed. "Everything seems to be in order," the tall inspector admitted grudgingly. "We'll close the complaint for now, but be aware that further violations could result in fines or additional inspections." Liam watched them leave, a bitter taste in his mouth. It was clear that Karen's strategy was to bury him in bureaucratic harassment, hoping to wear him down until he either gave up or made a mistake. But Liam wasn't about to give her the satisfaction. That evening, as he sat on his back deck surveying the damage, Liam's phone buzzed with a text message from Nick. "Got in touch with someone at the precinct at Reed. They'll assign a detective to the arson case, but don't expect miracles. Without solid evidence or a witness, it'll be tough to pin this on anyone." Liam sighed, setting the phone down on the table. He appreciated Nick's honesty, but it wasn't exactly what he wanted to hear. If the police weren't going to take swift action, he needed to find another way to protect himself. He couldn't afford to sit back and wait for Karen to make her next move. The next day, he contacted a private security firm that specialized in home surveillance. By the afternoon, a team arrived to install a more advanced system with high-resolution cameras covering every angle of his property, motion detectors linked to his phone, and even a few discrete audio sensors near the fence line. It was expensive, but Liam considered it a necessary investment. If Karen or anyone else tried something again, he would have undeniable proof this time. That night, as he reviewed the live feeds from the cameras on his phone, Liam felt a small sense of relief for the first time in days. He wasn't naive enough to think the new security measures would solve all his problems, but at least now he had an extra layer of defense. And with Nick working on the legal front, he had some hope that they could start pushing back against Karen's campaign of intimidation. But Karen wasn't finished. The following morning, Liam woke up to find another letter slipped under his door. This one was even more aggressive than the previous complaints. It accused him of disrupting the peace and creating a public nuisance. With his late-night gatherings, demanding that he cease all social events or face formal action from the neighborhood committee. The letter ended with a veiled threat, implying that if he didn't comply, things could get worse. Liam stared at the letter, anger simmering just below the surface. He crumpled the paper in his hand and tossed it into the trash. Karen clearly thought she could bully him into submission, but she had underestimated him. If she wanted a fight, she was going to get one. A few days had passed since the incident with the inspectors and the latest threat from Karen. Liam had taken every possible precaution. His new security system was running smoothly. He was working closely with Nick, and he had made sure all his paperwork was in order in case Karen tried to pull another stunt involving the city. But despite his best efforts, the tension hadn't eased. If anything, it had only grown stronger, hanging over him like a dark cloud. He knew Karen wasn't someone who gave up easily, and he doubted she would stop at sending letters or filing complaints. She had crossed a line with the fire and the ambulance incident, and people like her didn't back down after they escalated things that far. It didn't take long for Liam's suspicions to be confirmed. Late one night, as he was checking the live feed from his cameras, something unusual caught his attention. One of the motion detectors near the edge of his property had been triggered, and the camera showed a figure moving along the fence line. The person was dressed in dark clothing, making it difficult to make out any features, but it was clear they were trying to stay out of sight. Liam's pulse quickened as he watched the figure pause near one of the bushes, seemingly looking for something. Grabbing his phone, Liam quickly called the private security firm he had hired. He explained the situation, and they assured him that a patrol unit was on the way. While waiting for them to arrive, Liam stayed glued to the camera feed, watching as the figure moved closer to the area where his outdoor kitchen had once stood. The person crouched down, appearing to place something on the ground, before hurrying back toward the fence and disappearing into the night. When the security patrol arrived a few minutes later, Liam met them outside and led them to the spot where he had seen the figure. To his surprise and alarm, they found a small, black device partially buried in the dirt. One of the guards examined it closely before turning to Liam with a serious expression. "This looks like a tracking device," the guard said. "It's not uncommon in cases where someone's being targeted. Whoever planted this might have been trying to monitor your movements or gather information about who comes and goes from your property." A chill ran down Liam's spine. A tracking device? This wasn't just petty harassment anymore, this was calculated and invasive. Someone had gone to the trouble of sneaking onto his property in the middle of the night to plant a device meant to spy on him. It was a level of intrusion he hadn't expected, and it left him feeling both angry and vulnerable. "Can you remove it?" Liam asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "We'll take care of it," the guard assured him. "I'd also recommend doing a sweep of the rest of your property to make sure there aren't any other devices hidden around." They spent the next hour combing through the yard, checking every corner, every bush, and every crevice where someone might have hidden something. Fortunately, they didn't find any more devices, but the discovery of even one was enough to rattle Liam. He thanked the guards and promised to follow up with Nick in the morning. As he walked back inside, Liam couldn't help but wonder who was behind this. Was it Karen herself, or had she enlisted someone else to do her dirty work? Either way, it was clear that things were escalating faster than he had anticipated. He couldn't afford to sit back and wait for the next attack. He needed to be proactive. The next morning, Liam met with Nick at his office. He explained what had happened the previous night and showed him the tracking device that the security team had removed. "This is serious," Nick said, frowning as he examined the device. "If they're planting things like this on your property, it means they're not just trying to intimidate you, they're trying to gather information. We need to figure out why." "I have a feeling it's connected to Karen," Liam said, leaning forward in his chair. "She's been trying to push me out of the neighborhood for months, and after the fire, I wouldn't put anything past her." "It's possible," Nick agreed, "but we can't accuse her without solid evidence. If we want to build a case, we need more than just your suspicions." Nick suggested hiring a private investigator to look into Karen's background and any potential connections she might have to individuals or groups capable of orchestrating something like this. Liam agreed it wasn't a cheap option, but at this point he was willing to do whatever it took to protect himself and his property. Over the next few days, things seemed to quiet down. There were no new letters, no surprise visits from inspectors, and no suspicious activity on the security cameras. But Liam knew better than to let his guard down. He continued to keep a close eye on everything, checking the camera feeds regularly and keeping in touch with Nick and the security team. Then, just as he was beginning to think the situation might be calming down, he received a phone call that changed everything. It was the private investigator who had been digging into Karen's background. "I found something you might want to see," the investigator said. "Karen's been involved in some shady real estate deals in the past. There's a pattern: she targets properties, pressures the owners to sell, and then flips them for a profit. And it looks like she's working with a couple of other people who have a history of doing the same thing. Liam felt a surge of anger as he listened to the investigator's report. So that was her game. This wasn't just about petty neighborhood politics. Karen was running a scheme, using harassment and intimidation to force people out so she could cash in. And now she had set her sights on Liam's property. What do we do with this information? Liam asked, trying to keep his voice calm despite the frustration boiling inside him. First, we need to gather more evidence, the investigator replied. I'll keep digging, but if we can prove that she's been targeting you as part of a larger scheme, we might be able to take legal action. As Liam hung up the phone, he felt a renewed sense of determination. He had suspected all along that Karen's motives went deeper than just a personal grudge, but now he had confirmation. This wasn't just about standing up to a difficult neighbor anymore. It was about exposing a corrupt operation and protecting his home from being stolen out from under him. That night, Liam reviewed everything. He had the complaint letters, the photos of the fire damage, the tracking device, and now the investigator's report. It was starting to come together, but there was still more work to be done. He knew he couldn't do it alone, but with Nick, the security team, and the private investigator on his side, he felt more prepared than ever to face whatever Karen threw at him next. He didn't know how long this fight would last, but one thing was certain: he wasn't going down without a fight. And if Karen thought she could intimidate him into giving up, she was about to learn just how wrong she was. Liam had been expecting Karen to retaliate after his private investigator uncovered her shady dealings. It was only a matter of time before she made her next move. And sure enough, she didn't keep him waiting long. Just a few days later, Liam received a formal notice, not through the mail this time, but hand-delivered to his door. The letter, printed on expensive-looking stationery, accused him of violating community standards and outlined a series of infractions that Karen claimed warranted immediate action. Among the listed grievances were fabricated issues like improper property maintenance and noise disturbances at hours when Liam wasn't even home. But the final paragraph was what caught his attention. Karen was calling for an emergency meeting where the neighborhood would vote on whether Liam should be sanctioned or even forced to sell his property. He read the letter twice, each word fueling his growing frustration. This wasn't just another petty attempt to harass him. This was a coordinated attack designed to turn the entire neighborhood against him. If Karen managed to sway enough people to her side, she could push through her agenda and make his life even more miserable. Liam immediately called Nick, who, after listening to the contents of the letter, didn't sound surprised. "This is a classic move in cases like yours," Nick said. "She's trying to isolate you by turning public opinion against you. If she gets enough support, it'll make it harder for you to fight back because you'll look like the bad guy to anyone who doesn't know the full story." "So what do we do?" Liam asked, already knowing the answer but hoping for a less complicated solution. "We show up to that meeting and push back hard," Nick replied. "I'll be there with you. In the meantime, we should get in touch with a few of the neighbors who might be willing to speak on your behalf. It's important that you don't look like you're fighting this battle alone." The following day, Liam went door to door to speak with a few neighbors he trusted, or at least those who hadn't openly sided with Karen. He explained the situation, shared what he knew about Karen's real motives, and asked if they would come to the meeting to hear his side of the story. To his relief, several neighbors agreed, though many of them seemed nervous about openly opposing Karen. It was clear that her influence was stronger than he had realized. As the day of the meeting approached, tension in the neighborhood grew palpable. People whispered in hushed tones whenever Liam walked by, and he could feel the weight of their stares, filled with curiosity or suspicion. Karen, on the other hand, seemed to thrive on the attention. She was often seen chatting with groups of neighbors, her expression smug and self-assured. It was obvious that she believed she had already won. On the evening of the meeting, Liam arrived at the community center with Nick by his side. The room was packed. Far more people had shown up than he had expected. Karen was already there, standing near the front with a group of her loyal supporters. She greeted Liam with a thin, insincere smile, as if this were just another one of her neighborhood improvement initiatives and not a blatant power play. Once everyone was seated, Karen called the meeting to order. She began with a long-winded speech about how important it was to maintain the integrity and harmony of the neighborhood, subtly implying that Liam was a threat to both. She cited a list of supposed complaints and violations, each one more ridiculous than the last. But she presented them with such confidence that some of the neighbors began nodding in agreement. Liam felt his frustration growing with every word, but Nick placed a hand on his shoulder, a silent reminder to stay calm. When Karen finally finished, Nick stood up and addressed the room. His tone was measured but firm as he dismantled each of Karen's accusations one by one, pointing out the lack of evidence and the clear bias in her complaints. Furthermore, Nick said, his voice carrying across the room, it's worth noting that recent investigations have uncovered troubling patterns in how certain properties in this neighborhood have been targeted, pressured into selling, and then resold at a profit. I won't name names. But I think it's important that we all ask ourselves who really benefits from pushing out residents like Liam. A murmur spread through the crowd as people exchanged uneasy glances. Karen's confident demeanor faltered for the first time. She quickly tried to regain control of the narrative, accusing Nick of making baseless accusations and attempting to smear her good name. But the damage had already been done. Doubt had been sown among the neighbors. Before the meeting could descend into chaos, one of the older residents, Mr. Langley, stood up. He was known for being fair-minded and well-respected in the community. I've lived in this neighborhood for over 20 years, he said, his voice calm but authoritative. I've seen a lot of changes, some for the better, some not. But what I've always valued most is our sense of community, and right now it feels like we're losing that because of personal grudges and power struggles. He paused, letting his words sink in. I don't know all the details of what's going on between Liam and Karen, but I do know this: we shouldn't be trying to force out someone who's done nothing but be a good neighbor. We should be finding ways to work together, not tear each other apart. A ripple of agreement passed through the crowd, and several people began nodding along. Karen opened her mouth to respond, but whatever she was about to say was drowned out by a sudden chorus of voices calling for a vote. Realizing she was losing control of the situation, Karen reluctantly agreed to proceed. When the vote was finally taken, the results were closer than Liam had expected, but ultimately Karen's motion to sanction him was defeated. A sense of relief washed over him as he realized that, at least for now, he had won this round. But he knew better than to think it was over. Karen wasn't the type to give up easily, and if anything, this setback would only make her more determined. After the meeting, several neighbors approached Liam to express their support, including a few who had previously seemed indifferent. You handled yourself well tonight, one of them said. If you ever need anything, don't hesitate to ask. It was a small victory, but it meant a lot. For the first time in weeks, Liam felt like he wasn't completely alone in this fight. He thanked them sincerely, knowing that their support could make all the difference in the battles to come. As he walked back home with Nick, they discussed their next steps. They still needed more concrete evidence to expose Karen's real agenda, and they couldn't afford to let their guard down. But for now, Liam allowed himself a moment to breathe. He had survived Karen's latest attack, and though the war was far from over, he was more determined than ever to see it through to the end. Liam knew the battle was far from over. Defeating Karen's motion at the neighborhood meeting had bought him time, but it hadn't ended the conflict. If anything, it seemed to have made Karen even more desperate. Over the next few days, things took an unsettling turn. Strange vehicles were spotted idling near Liam's property at odd hours, and the motion detectors on his security system were triggered multiple times during the night, though no one ever seemed to be there when he checked the camera footage. It was clear that Karen or whoever was working with her wasn't done with him yet. Then, one night, the situation escalated to a dangerous new level. Around midnight, Liam was woken by a loud crash from outside. Jumping out of bed, he grabbed his phone and checked the live feed from his security cameras. His heart raced as he saw two masked figures attempting to break into his garage. Without wasting a second, he called the police, reporting the attempted break-in. But he knew they might not arrive in time. Acting quickly, Liam remotely activated the floodlights around his property and set off the alarm system. A loud, piercing siren blared through the night, startling the intruders. Disoriented by the sudden burst of light and noise, they hesitated for a moment before turning and fleeing toward a waiting car parked down the street. Liam managed to capture the license plate on camera just before the vehicle sped off into the darkness. When the police finally arrived, they took his statement and reviewed the security footage. One of the officers, a grizzled veteran who seemed unimpressed by much, raised an eyebrow as he watched the video. "These guys knew what they were doing," he said. "Quick in, quick out. Probably not amateurs." "Do you think they'll come back?" Liam asked, trying to keep his voice steady despite the adrenaline still coursing through his veins. "Hard to say," the officer replied. "But they didn't get what they came for, so it's possible. We'll run the plates you got on the car, see if we can track them down." After the police left, Liam sat in his living room, staring at the screen of his phone where the captured footage played on a loop. He couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than just a random break-in attempt. The timing, the precision, it all pointed to something more calculated, and given everything that had happened recently, he had little doubt that Karen was somehow involved. But without concrete proof tying her to the incident, he was stuck in a frustrating limbo. The next day, Liam met with Nick to discuss their options. "We need to push harder," Nick said after hearing about the attempted break-in. "If they're willing to go this far, we can't afford to wait around and react. We need to take the fight to them." "How?" Liam asked. "I still don't have any hard evidence directly linking Karen to all of this." Nick leaned back in his chair, tapping a pen against the edge of his desk thoughtfully. "What about the private investigator? Maybe they found something we can use." It turned out Nick was right. When they contacted the investigator, he had news, big news. He had uncovered a paper trail linking Karen to a shell company that had been involved in several questionable real estate deals. The company's name had come up in connection with properties that had been forcibly sold under pressure, and in each case, Karen had played a key role in pushing the owners to sell. "This is it," Nick said, his eyes gleaming with determination. "This is the evidence we've been waiting for. We can prove that she's been running a scheme to force people out and profit off their properties." Liam felt a mix of relief and renewed anger. They finally had something solid, something they could use to expose Karen for who she really was. But there was still one problem: they needed to present this information in a way that would make an impact, and they needed to do it fast before Karen made another move. That evening, Liam and Nick put together a plan. They would present the evidence to the authorities, but they wouldn't stop there. They also planned to notify the local press, ensuring that the story got the attention it deserved. If Karen wanted to play dirty, they would show her that two could play that game. The next morning, they made their move. Nick filed a formal complaint with the city, attaching all the evidence the investigator had gathered. At the same time, Liam contacted a local journalist he knew, someone who had a reputation for digging into stories involving corruption and abuse of power. By the afternoon, the story was already gaining traction. Calls started coming in from reporters, asking for statements and more information. Karen, meanwhile, seemed caught off guard by the sudden onslaught of attention. For the first time, she was the one on the defensive. She tried to deny the allegations, but as more details emerged, it became clear that she was in serious trouble. The pressure continued to mount when the police confirmed that the car involved in the attempted break-in was registered to someone with ties to Karen's shell company. It was enough to warrant a deeper investigation, and soon Karen found herself facing not only public scrutiny but potential legal consequences as well. By the end of the day, Liam felt a weight lift from his shoulders. It wasn't over yet, there was still a long road ahead, and Karen wasn't the type to go down without a fight. But for the first time in weeks, he felt like he was finally gaining the upper hand. As he stood on his back deck that evening, watching the sunset over his damaged but still standing property, he allowed himself a moment of quiet satisfaction. Karen had tried to destroy him, but instead she had only made him stronger. And now, with the truth coming to light, he was ready to finish what she had started. In the days following the public exposure of Karen's scheme, the atmosphere in the neighborhood shifted dramatically. The once quiet whispers and wary glances that had followed Liam around were replaced by open conversations and apologies. Neighbors who had previously avoided him came forward, expressing support and regret for not speaking up sooner. With the mounting evidence against her and increased scrutiny from the authorities, Karen's influence had all but collapsed. It was clear that her reign of control was over. Liam kept a close eye on the unfolding situation. The police investigation, spurred by the evidence provided by the private investigator and the connection to the attempted break-in, was well underway. While Karen hadn't been officially charged yet, legal experts speculated that it was only a matter of time before she faced serious consequences. The city also launched an internal review of property transactions linked to the shell company, further tightening the noose around Karen and her associates. Despite the growing sense of vindication, Liam didn't feel triumphant. He wasn't the type to revel in someone else's downfall, no matter how much trouble they had caused him. His primary concern now was rebuilding his life and ensuring that something like this could never happen again. The damage to his outdoor kitchen still served as a painful reminder of how close he had come to losing everything. But with the support of friends, neighbors, and his lawyer, he felt ready to move forward. A few days later, Liam received a call from Nick. "Good news," Nick said. "The city's legal department has confirmed that Karen violated multiple regulations. They're preparing charges related to fraud, harassment, and property intimidation. It looks like she won't be bothering you or anyone else for a long time." Liam exhaled slowly, feeling a wave of relief wash over him. It was the news he had been hoping for, the closure he needed after weeks of tension and uncertainty. But Nick wasn't finished. "Also, I heard from the local council. They're interested in setting up a new neighborhood committee, one that's actually fair and focused on improving the community, not controlling it." The idea intrigued Liam. He had never been particularly interested in local politics or community management, but after everything he had been through, he understood the importance of having a fair and balanced leadership in place. "Do you think they'd want me involved?" he asked. "I think they'd be lucky to have you," Nick replied with a chuckle. "You've already proven that you're willing to stand up for what's right." Over the next few weeks, things gradually began to return to normal. Karen disappeared from the neighborhood, her house put up for sale, and her influence erased. The new neighborhood committee was formed, with Liam reluctantly accepting a position on it after being encouraged by several neighbors. Though he wasn't sure how long he would stay involved, he wanted to ensure that no one else in the community would have to face the kind of harassment he had endured. One sunny afternoon, Liam decided to host a small gathering at his house. It wasn't anything fancy, just a few close friends and neighbors, some good food, and music playing softly in the background. As people mingled and laughed, Liam looked around, feeling a renewed sense of peace. The scars from the fire were still visible, but they no longer felt like a symbol of defeat. Instead, they reminded him of everything he had fought for and won. As the sun began to set, Mrs. Whitaker, the elderly neighbor who had supported Liam from the beginning, approached him with a warm smile. "You did good, Liam," she said, her voice kind and steady. "You stood your ground and you made this place better for all of us." "Thanks, Mrs. Whitaker," Liam replied, smiling back. "I couldn't have done it without people like you." He meant it. While the fight against Karen had often felt like a lonely battle, he now realized that he hadn't been alone. There were always people willing to stand by him, even if they had been too afraid to do so at first. And that, more than anything, gave him hope for the future. As the evening wore on and the last guests began to leave, Liam stood alone on his deck, watching the stars appear one by one in the darkening sky. For the first time in weeks, he felt truly at peace. The ordeal with Karen had tested him in ways he never expected, but it had also shown him his own resilience. He had learned that sometimes standing up for yourself wasn't just about protecting what you own, it was about protecting who you are. And now, with Karen gone and the neighborhood moving forward, Liam could finally do the same.